Okay, issues with TouchCast. Hopefully I can resolve them this evening, but I want to continue at least Unit 6 Lecture 1. This will be Lecture C and hopefully the last part of it. Alright, immigrants, we ended with Chinese and Japanese immigrants coming in through Angel Island on the Pacific coast. We need to talk about some of the contributions immigrants have made. They made a great deal of contributions, valuable contributions to Americans' industrial growth in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That's the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Examples of this would include the Chinese and the Irish workers building Transcontinental Railroad. Remember that met at Promontory Point in Utah. We should keep in mind that immigrant workers are going to face racial discrimination very often, prejudice, alright. They're going to work for very low pay in dangerous conditions, and while they're here contributing to America's industrial strength and growth, and move to the eastern cities, their families are going to be living in crowded tenements and slums, which we'll go into a little more in class in a later lecture. We want to remember that the immigrants are going to work in the textile and steel mills in the Northeast and in the clothing industry in New York City. Slavs, Italians, and Poles are from Poland, Slavs are Eastern Europeans over by Russia and the Balkans, are going to work in the coal mines of the Middle East coast, Appalachian Mountains. Okay, there. Immigrants are going to, well, there's two main theories about assimilation. Assimilation is how immigrants blend into American society. The first one, and the one that used to carry the most weight, would be the melting pot theory. And that's the idea that immigrants come from all over the world. They bring their different cultures and traditions, they're very distinct cultures and traditions, to America, where they all blend or melt together to form a uniquely American culture. So it's not necessarily the one that's most popular anymore. This is the one we're always taught, though, right? Immigrants come here, they settle in, they work very hard to learn English, they adopt American customs, they become citizens, and their culture becomes part of the American culture. And in the melting pot thesis, melting pot idea, public schools play a huge role in helping to assimilate immigrants into American society. When we look at the melting pot idea, many historians now, I think the majority of historians would say it just doesn't work. It's not the way it happens, and I think common sense shows us it doesn't work also, because the other big idea, main thesis, is going to be the salad bowl or mixing bowl thesis. And in this idea, we know immigrants come over and they settle into ethnic neighborhoods. An ethnic neighborhood is a term you should know, probably wasn't on that whiteboard. It's a neighborhood where people settle from the same homeland, or people of the same cultures settle. So these are your Little Italy's, your Chinatown, okay, the Irish neighborhood, Germantown, Polish town, all right? And it makes sense why people would settle in ethnic neighborhoods. If we think about it, it's going to be where their native language is spoken. They'll find their churches, their foods. It's going to ease the transition, make things a lot less scary than just popping over in the new world. That's rough enough. All right, so they settle in these ethnic neighborhoods, and then what the salad bowl theory says, the mixing bowl theory says, is immigrants work very hard to keep some of their own traditions and customs and pass those on to their children. So while they do work hard to learn some English, adopt American customs, and become American citizens, they also work very hard to preserve the traditions and customs of their native lands and pass those on to their children. And it's this uniqueness, this blending of distinct cultures, that contributes to our uniqueness. The diversity that is America, okay, is what makes America so unique. And in the salad bowl theory, historians would argue that schools both help and hurt immigrants. Because WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, traditionally have controlled public education, and therefore they force schools to teach and promote WASP values. Now that's Protestant values, also Protestant history, Protestant customs. And a Protestant is a Christian that is any Christian that is not a Catholic or an Orthodox, Roman Greek Orthodox, or a Mormon. All right, so these salad bowl theorists, these critics of the melting pot theory, would say that public schools are a tool used to force immigrants to lose their culture and adopt WASP culture as their own. So the thoughts on this will give rise then to the need for parochial schools, schools with religious affiliations. So this gives rise to Roman Catholic schools and other religious schools in an effort to preserve those immigrants' culture. All right, so it's similar to what we've seen with the Native Americans in an attempt to anglicize or Americanize the Native American. It's also the public schools then used to do that with immigrants. All right, immigration is going to contribute to the rapid growth of cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. These cities are going to become both manufacturing and transportation hubs in the United States. These cities are going to grow very, very rapidly, and it's going to lead to the development, and we'll talk about the problems of that development later on, but political problems, corrupt political machines is what this rapid rise is going to let occur. All right, party machines is what the term is. Tammany Hall in New York will be an example of one of these, and Boss Tweed is the most famous of the political bosses running a machine. These bosses, these machines, will take new immigrants as they come off the boat or arrive in the city, and they'll help them get jobs and housing and food and money. And in return, they expect new immigrants and the poor to give them votes, to keep electing them in office or allow them to control the candidates who are elected to office. So the bosses and the political machines have control over the city. And while these jobs don't pay very well, it gives them control over all the contracts, all the work that's done in the city. So it allows them to sell them and grow rich through bribery and graft, through corruption. Okay, so also the quick rise of these cities, the quick growth of these cities, meant they grow faster than the infrastructure or responsibility for infrastructure that could be worked out. Meaning, and we still have these arguments today, whose job is it to provide the necessities in the city? Who's going to pick up the garbage? Who's going to supply water? Who's going to get rid of waste? All right, and it hadn't been worked out yet, and that means the cities have or don't have access to clean water. There's housing shortages. There's problems with public services like sewage and public transportation. And I mean, we still work at this today, or argue over today, whose job is it to provide these services. But the cities grow so fast in the late 19th century and early 20th century that nobody's there to take care of it. So that we're going to see a constant shortage of the necessities of life. All right, and I don't know why the SOL is still here at this point. New York City begins construction of the nation's first subway system. All right, and other nations build, other cities in the nation build trolley cars and streetcar lines, and apparently that's important. All right, so despite many of the contributions made by immigrants in the building of America during the 19th and 20th centuries, they are going to face hardship and discrimination, like I said, from native-born Americans. That's nativism, right? We remember that, hatred and distrust of immigrants. And this is another common theme throughout U.S. history. We worry about immigrants because they're going to take our jobs, all right? They're going to take jobs from an American, all right? There's also going to be a great deal of religious and cultural discrimination against immigrants, as demonstrated by our earliest anti-immigration legislation, and you're going to need to know two examples of this. So early on, Congress is going to attempt to limit immigration by certain groups through laws. The Chinese Exclusion Act will be the first. And it's going to ban Chinese immigration for 10 years. I think that's in 1882, okay? Then we're going to see a number of immigration restriction acts. The one you have to remember is 1921. Because it places numerical limits for the first time. It actually puts quotas on. So we're only going to accept this many immigrants from this nation. All right, this many immigrants from that nation. And we pick and choose which countries we like more than others, and based on nationality and origin of country. or country of origin, we decide how many immigrants we'll take in. And Southern and Eastern Europe are going to be mostly affected by the Anti-Immigration Act, the Immigration Restriction Act, because of the influence of communism and anarchism over there. And we'll talk about those later on. But anyway, the early Immigration Restriction Acts from the 1880s to the 1920s is going to effectively cut off immigration for several decades. But I want you to remember both of them. All right, now that's the end of Lecture 1 for Unit 6. And we'll try and see if I can figure out what's going on with TouchCast and get back to that for the later lectures. All right, back.